Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Susanna DeBaca, and I'm the president of Business Publications Corporation and the publisher of DSM Magazine. And I want to welcome all of you to the first of our Lifting the Veil series on the mental health effects of COVID-19 called Life Interrupted. You may know that DSM has long been committed to the health and well-being of our community. And about 4 years ago, at the suggestion of one of our team members, Jordan Croft, we launched a publication to address mental health. We called it Lifting the Veil in reference to the need to reduce stigma. Last year, we added a panel event, and we plan to do the same this year. And then COVID-19 happened. We quickly realized that there was a need to shine a light on how this situation will have short and long-term impact on the community. And this series came together very quickly in record time, thanks to our team, some outside experts, and an incredible group of sponsors. I want to give a shout out to the entire DSM team who made this possible. Christine Riccelli, our editor-in-chief, Larry Erickson, Luke Manderfeld, Sean Rakina, Emily Schultz, Yolanda Crystal, Rebecca Zoot, Jordan Croft, and Rochelle Kelberg, and even more. And Luke is going to be managing our video behind the scenes. It's our first one, so we hope you'll give us a little leeway if we have to figure out some of our Zoom capabilities along the way. So as you can see, we have an amazing group of sponsors, and I want to thank them. Our presenting sponsor is Delta Dental of Iowa. Our supporting sponsors are United Way of Central Iowa and Clive Behavioral Health, which is part of Mercy One. Our sustaining sponsors are Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, Employee and Family Resources, Make It Okay, UCS Healthcare, and Des Moines University. This is the first in our series, and today we're going to be focusing on Youth Interrupted. Here's how the program will work. I'm going to share a quick video, then I'll introduce our speakers, and I'll start the panel. We'll ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then towards the very end, if we have time, I'll open it up for audience questions. I've already received some questions from people as they were registering, and we tried to integrate those into the questions to the panelists already. But we know that this is all about youth and the problems of youth. So before we get started, let's hear from some youth themselves. Luke, can you cue the video?
What I don't like about being in quarantine is because it's boring and I have nothing to do.
I miss hanging out with my friends at school, and I'm worried about all the schoolwork I'm gonna have to do.
I'm missing so much right now, and it's mostly the little things that I took for granted before.
I miss some of my teachers.
I don't like that I'm not able to see my friends.
I also miss school a lot right now. Never thought I'd say that, but I just miss the environment and seeing my friends and teachers every day.
What I miss about school is playing with my friends and just like doing work. And I miss a lot of my friends.
You do?
I do.
Do you keep in touch with a lot of friends?
I do. I FaceTime with them quite a bit.
What I like about being home is that I have more time to spend with my family.
It was hard to get used to at first, but now I actually really like it, and I'm even considering doing college online, but I don't know how my mom would feel about that, so maybe not.
It's way better than waking up at 6:30 in the morning.
What time did you have to be on the bus?
7:30,
What time do you wake up now?
9:30.
One thing that I like about being at home is that I don't have to wear a uniform to go to school.
I can work on the couch and lay down. We probably won't be going back to our normal before this situation, but I hope we can find a new normal and adapt to it and move forward.
Well, I think working on the couch has its merits, but obviously this situation has had a lot of stresses for kids, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce a very, very impressive group of panelists. We're very grateful that you could join us. First of all, we have Dr. Sasha Khosravi. He is a pediatric psychologist at Clive Behavioral Health Center, which is a partnership with Mercy One, and as well as the medical director and department chair at Mercy One's Behavioral Center. He will also be the chief medical officer at the new Clive Behavioral Health Center once it's built. Dr. Khosravi primarily runs the inpatient unit at Mercy One, which treats acute danger issues with adolescents. He's practiced in the Des Moines metro area for over 15 years. Next, we have Dr. Kelly Hill, who is the Director of Clinical Services for Children and Adult Clinical Staff at the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. She is a licensed child adolescent psychologist and has been practicing in this area for over 20 years. She holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology and provides therapy and psychological assessment to toddlers through adolescents, parents, and families. She has special interest in autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, psychological assessments, EMDR, depression, anxiety, trauma, attachment, and behavior problems. Next, we have Mary Jane Cobb, who is the executive director of the Iowa State Education Association, or ISEA, a role that she's held since 2008. The ISEA represents pre-K through 12 educators, education support professionals, community college faculty, area education agency professionals, retired educators, and aspiring educators, with contracts covering more than 50,000 employees in Iowa. And in the context of today's conversation, Mary Jane is also the very proud nana of a graduating high school senior. Next, we have Renee Hardman, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Iowa, a premier mentoring organization that provides one-on-one mentoring relationships between children and adults. Renee is also an at-large West Des Moines councilwoman and mayor pro tem. Her service to young people has been recognized through many, many awards, and the most recent one being the 2020 40 Under 40 Alumni of the Year by the Business Record, which is DSM's sister division. And finally, we are pleased to have Nate Monson, who is the Executive Director of Iowa Safe Schools, a position he's held since 2007, making him the second longest serving CEO of a statewide LGBTQ organization in the actually entire nation. Nate's commitment to helping others, especially LGBTQ youth, is reflected in his service to the community on a variety of boards and commissions, including an appointment to the Iowa Department of Human Rights Board by Governor Chet Culver, as well as many awards. So thank you to all of our speakers. And now I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Delta Dental of Iowa. For more than 50 years, Delta Dental of Iowa has been improving the health and smiles of Iowans. Delta Dental provides dental and vision benefits to more than 1.2 million Iowans. And most recently, Delta Dental and its foundation committed $10.5 million in COVID-19 relief funds to Iowa dentists for claims advances, as well as grants to nonprofit. And since 2002, Delta Dental has invested more than $42 million to improve oral health and overall health of Iowans. I'm pleased to introduce Jamie Matisse, who is the Professional Relations Director at Delta Dental. Jamie?
Thank you, Susanna. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jamie Matisse, and I'm the Professional Relations Director for Delta Dental of Iowa. As the COVID-19 outbreak dramatically altered our daily life over the last month, organizations in Iowa and around the country have moved quickly to assess how to protect one another and how we could lend a hand to our neighbors in need. I'm very fortunate to work for an organization like Delta Dental, very proud also. Our company and its foundation have committed more than $10.5 million to relief efforts in Iowa for dentists, community health centers, and nonprofits. As a health and wellness company providing dental and vision benefits for 1.2 million Iowans, Delta Dental understands not only the importance of our physical health, but also emotional well-being. This is why we are so pleased to support the Lifting of the Veil series and the important messages it brings to Iowans. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamie. And now let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask our panelists the same question, and we're going to go in a bit of a round robin, and they can answer one by one. So the question that we're going to start out with is simply, from your professional perspective, what are the biggest youth mental health challenges during the coronavirus situation? And so we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Khosravi. What about you?
First of all, it's great to be here. Appreciate it. Important topic, obviously, and the pandemic's been a huge traumatic event, really impacting everyone, including our children. And for me, honestly, I work in the hospital setting, so wearing this mask all the time and these eye shields create a barrier in trying to connect with the children in the hospital. And so I have to provide a lot of reassurance with the kids that I'm working with that A, I don't have COVID-19, and B, this is still a safe environment. So that's been challenging just from a practical therapeutic relationship standpoint. But we have seen a large rise in kids with elements of anxiety, which really is a natural response. However, the duration and intensity has warranted more intensive treatment, including hospitalization. And increased anxiety in children can present with a lot of disruptive behaviors and aggression. The areas that I've seen are primarily around three areas where I see the anxiety revolving. One is fear of falling into poverty as parents lose their job or short hours. Fear of the virus itself impacting themselves or loved ones. And also the learning crisis with lack of school, the lack of routine, the lack of the social aspect of school has really impacted a lot of children. We've seen increased calls in crisis line calls, suicide rates, and drug use as national trends. It's actually projected 30% of children will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. The child safety, and the lockdown and shelter-in-place measures actually come with heightened risk of witnessing or suffering from domestic violence or abuse. So that's definitely a cycle that we're seeing that can be definitely something we need to monitor closely.
Well, thank you for those insights. Dr. Hill, from a clinical situation, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm noticing a lot of the similar things that Dr. Khosravi mentioned, but I've noticed a pattern where initially, when we first started the pandemic, there was a lot of panic, high anxiety from children that might not necessarily suffer from anxiety, but again, a normal response, I agree with that. But then it's escalated to more of a clinical level where it's a little more unstable. And then I found that children were starting to kind of settle in. So like, okay, we're not doing school, we're trying to find a new schedule, new routine. We're safe, kind of realizing that they were safe as long as they followed the guidelines and things like that for the most part. But now I'm seeing a trend over the past couple of weeks where more depression is setting in. So the isolation is starting to really weigh on people, and including our children and our youth. So yeah, so I think that, I definitely have the same concern that Dr. Khosravi mentioned with suicide rates. We already have a very high rate of suicide among our adolescents, and even starting younger, for our older children as well. So when you have people who tend to isolate anyway with depression, and now they're forced to isolate, and it's more difficult with their peers and their strongest support group, those rates are likely to go up, and that's a very big concern.
Very scary. Mary Jane, sorry, my dog has just seen geese on our pond. This is happening in all the Zoom calls. There's nothing I can do about it. So Mary Jane, take it over.
Thanks. It happens to all of us in our Zoom calls, so we understand that. I think that as I watch the video of the students, I think that one of the things that I hear from educators about most is something you heard the students say. They miss their colleagues, their peers, they miss their teachers. I think it's the isolation that some students are feeling and the lack of routine and schedule. And while it may sound like a lot of fun to sleep until 9:30, that schedule that students are in is critically important. And so I really think that those connections, as much as our young people like to be on their devices, they're realizing how much those personal connections really mean to them and how important they are to them in their day-to-day lives. And so I think that for us in the school setting, trying to figure out how to recreate some of those connections in a virtual way is important, and then trying to figure that out as we move forward into the next year. Some of the biggest challenges that we're facing.
Renee, you're working with a lot of children who are at risk. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing?
Well, you know, first of all, Susanna, thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel and to be with this group to talk about such an important event in our lives and how it affects our young people. And I would say that, as we all know, that when these kinds of events happen, there is a disproportionate amount of extra stress placed on communities of color, communities that are marginalized, communities that already have all the resources. So you compound all that together and it becomes such a bigger problem to overcome. In the world in which I work, we try to do the connections. I think that all of us have probably heard about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the first one is basic safety and physiological needs. And the second one, of course, is making sure that, you know, people feel safe and their security. And that third part is connectedness. And that's really what we're finding too, that whether they're at risk or whatnot, everybody is feeling isolated, not connected. Their social systems in this village that we all need to raise healthy kids is being disbanded in this distancing that we have, physical distancing. So we're just finding that a lot of our kids are acting out in different kinds of ways. And we'll talk more about maybe the digital divide that really has a major impact on the minority community. But I do agree with you, Mary Jane, that a lot of this is that loss of connectedness, the loss of contact with their mentors, although we are trying to find ways for them to connect because they are needed more so than ever. But that's a big, big challenge for many of our youth.
Thanks, Renee, and we will come back to some of the issues that you bring up. And so Nate, you're working with LGBTQ youth. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing in terms of mental health?
So, you know, before the pandemic happened, the before time, we, you know, honestly, LGBTQ youth had a lot of issues accessing services or resources. You know, very few mental health counselors and health clinicians are truly competent in being able to serve this population. I mean, it takes a special skill set to do that. And, you know, we already have limited services, and then now there's this isolation that sets in for them. And for LGBTQ students, a lot of the students we serve, their families aren't really supportive. So if they did have access to services, especially, you know, that one teacher, and that's, ISEA is so important because of that. Like, those one teachers are so critical because they're the ones that are going to be sticking up for them. They don't have that right now to verify their pronouns, to say these are the right names, and they're in homes where they're being misgendered, and it can be very dangerous for them. And so this total lack of resources is scary. And when we're talking about suicide risk, LGBTQ youth are already 7 to 10 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. And so this is a startling time for this population. And I think most of our marginalized populations are underserved populations. It's not that they don't have services available, it's just that we're not reaching out to them and serving them correctly. And so how do we do that is going to be a challenge long term.
Mm-hmm. Well, some themes are emerging from the things that you guys are saying. So now let me ask you some individual questions to drill down a little bit. So Dr. Khosravi, can you talk a little bit about how telehealth is working for youth in addressing these mental health issues?
So we've actually been doing telehealth for a number of years at Mercy One, trying to really do an outreach towards rural communities to improve access, but it's obviously taken on a completely different life at this point. Almost obviously it's necessary with safety, with social distancing. So that's been a huge priority for us. But I've really seen that it's improved the accessibility. It's really allowing some of those kids that sometimes no-show you or refuse to come, that have social anxiety or aggression or oppositional behaviors, as a way that we can reach out to them. And honestly, some families that drive almost 2-3 hours all across the state, much more accessible to them and financially saves them the burden of gas money and travel, obviously. But really, most importantly, I feel like I've been able to capture the child's life in a way that I can't really experience in the office setting. When I'm doing some of these telehealth appointments, some of these kids that I'm interacting with are actually showing me their pets. I'm meeting their siblings. They're showing me their rooms and their trophies and their accomplishments. So I've really felt almost a closer connection to them, which is the irony because I'm actually not seeing them face to face. So that's been a really good experience for me personally. And we've had a little bit more outreach in terms of specific COVID-19 appointments. So we're actually trying to keep accessibility open for a lot of the kids who are struggling. I would say the major downfall is sometimes I'm not able to get their blood pressure or their pulse or their vitals and some of the medication side effects. So long-term sustainability of this model may have to be looked at, but I think it's definitely here at some level, moving on even post-pandemic.
So Dr. Hill, you also said you were using telehealth. So I'll ask you sort of the two-part question about how is telehealth working to address mental health issues for youth? But then I also want to hear from you, what does the interruption in the social aspect or rituals mean for our kids' development? And Luke, can you move it to the next slide? Because I think I went out of order. Okay, Dr. Hill?
Yes, I completely agree with Dr. Khosravi about, like, there are definitely some benefits of this that I've noticed as well. Being able to be in the home of the child and see the way that they live it's fascinating, and just a whole nother level that, you know, we don't usually get to experience. I totally appreciate that. But also I would say, I do a lot of play therapy with younger children. And so I was very nervous about, would I be able to still see these children, you know, with telehealth? Because I just kind of imagined at first that it would be impossible with telehealth. But I've experimented, I've done some trainings, and I've, you know, had to step up my creativity for sure, but it is definitely possible. And there are lots of different things that you can do, even with play and games and puppets and all kinds of things with telehealth that the kids can really connect with and be able to express themselves in that type of therapy as well. So I found it, I just feel really blessed, honestly, that we're able to be in this age of technology at this time of the pandemic so that we can keep connected with our clients and keep working on the issues so important to them. The second part of your question, though, with how has this interrupted their development? You know, I'm thinking especially of teenagers, but, you know, for children too, there are certain things that they're missing out on. But for teenagers who are missing out on prom and graduation and award ceremonies and sports that actually can affect their potential for scholarship for college and things like that, it's very traumatic. For them, these are the most important things in their life. And so, you know, as adults, we might look back and go, oh, was that really that important? But if you put yourself in the shoes of the teenager, it is the most important event in their life right now. And so to have to miss that and not be able to ritualize in the way that they've always dreamed, you know, really for their entire life, worked so hard to be able to get to that point, and then not be able to ritualize it in the way that they've always been told and the way they've dreamed of, is devastating. And so there's a lot of mourning, I think, that happens for them. And I think, you know, our job as parents and the community is just to really validate that and support that, but also try to be creative in what we do to find alternate ways to celebrate and help them feel important and respected and validated that this is an important way. We're just going to do this in a different way right now, and focus on those things that we can control and help them to do that as well.
Thank you. Those are really, really important perspectives. And now let's ask Mary Jane about the actual education part. You talked a little bit in your opening comments, but what is the actual interruption in the educational process today going to mean for our kids as they try to catch up next year?
So I think the first thing I would say about this, I remember the day after the governor announced that schools wouldn't reopen for the remainder of the school year. As you can imagine, a lot of my friends on social media are educators. And I kept seeing one post pop up over and over again from educators. And it was basically an open letter to parents that said, while you're working with your students in sort of working on schoolwork from home, don't worry about catching them up for the school year next year. That's my job as an educator. You worry about loving them, supporting them, making sure that they feel safe and connected, and doing those kinds of things that you can do as a family, and let us as a school community work on that catching the students up for next year. And I saw a lot of parents take a deep breath and say, thanks for giving me permission to care more about the emotional supports of my kids than whether or not I can help them with that math lesson. So that's the first thing I would say is what's more important is that your students remember how much you love them and connected with them while they were home, and not whether or not you helped them with that algebra question. I would say that all of our districts will be working on what are called return to learn plans. And the department is putting out some really great guidance on that. And districts are really doing a deep dive with their staff and looking at, how far did we get in the standards this year? And what do we need to sort of reteach as we come back in? What kind of connections do we need the third grade teacher to make with the fourth grade teacher so we know what was lost? How do we go back and try to, at the beginning of the year, really focus on those social connections and our rituals and our schedules? Because we're going to have a lot of people coming in. We do this at the beginning of every school year because we have that summer slide and that summer sort of change in structure. But we're going to have to be really thoughtful about how we reintegrate those schedules and those routines so that students feel comfortable with that. And we all have to start having conversations now that our normal is going to be different when we start back to school. The school that they walk into when they go back in the fall is not going to look like what they left. And so trying not to set up unrealistic expectations that everything is just going to be like it was, but maybe making it interesting. What do you think it could look like? How could it be more interesting? I saw a picture of some students at a school that has reopened in another country, and the kids had social distancing hats on that had little propellers sticking out from them a few feet so that they knew the distance that they could be. So figuring out ways to make the things that we're going to have to be involved with fun and less threatening for students. But knowing that our districts, our educators are really focusing on that catching students up and trying not to let that be a lot more stress in the home right now. There's enough stress in our homes right now. And just maybe hug your kid more and worry about algebra a little less. And for all the math teachers out there, please forgive me for having just said that.
I love that, Mary Jane. Thank you very, very much. Okay, Renee, you referenced the digital divide in your earlier comments. So can you talk a little bit more about your concerns about that digital divide or about other equity issues that are affecting our kids?
Sure. As there is this adage that has come up since COVID, and it's that when white America gets the flu, people of color get the pneumonia. And it's really never been more elevated than when you look at how this crisis has affected everybody, but how it has truly affected communities of color. And in many ways, the digital divide is one of them. and that you look at the numerous amount of families that don't have access to broadband, that don't have what you call hotspots, that don't even have internet. And the world is moving virtually, and they can't even catch up with us because the libraries aren't out there for the free access to the internet when kids go there after school, and that's the only way in which they can get on the internet. So there are just large proportions of folks that just don't have the access to try to navigate in this new world that we're living in. And the more that we can do, like what Mary Jane is saying, the better we're all going to be. But it does have a disproportionate effects on minorities and people of color. I look at even just health services. Many of our families, the only time they even get medical services is through the school nurses, where they can get referrals to the clinics to get their teeth checked. So they're missing out on that opportunity to even have just access to some kind of medical services just to help them with conditions that can develop. And we all know what pre-health conditions has done in COVID and how it has affected folks with, pre-existing conditions. So I think we have to focus in on how and where we have the greatest need. It's in rural America, it's in communities of color. There's already educational things that they're affected by, and now this even just exacerbates the issue. And we talk about counseling. Counseling is great. There are certain communities that don't believe in counseling. They're afraid to go to counseling because you just don't tell your family business. And so to the degree that folks can make it more accessible and allow folks to feel comfortable coming in and sharing those kinds of experiences, the better we can be.
That's wonderful. So Nate, go ahead, Renee.
And I want to say that I was really, on a hopeful note, I was really happy to see just this Thursday, the Des Moines Public Schools entered into a partnership with Mediacom to provide 1,800 families with free internet and broadband. And Des Moines Public Schools is going to take on some of that in Mediacom. Those are the kind of phenomenal partnerships that we need to help this digital divide.
That's great. Thank you for bringing that up. So Nate, you talked a little bit in your opening comments about this, but can you talk a little bit more about how social isolation or interruption in education will affect LGBTQ kids who we know are already very, very much at risk, as you pointed out?
Yeah, just jumping on my previous comments, they're experiencing this lack of affirmation. And just yesterday, so, we practiced for this panel, we did a little rehearsal, and immediately after it happened, actually, for us as an organization, we've been doing these virtual GSA meetings, so trying to create virtual spaces for LGBTQ students. And we actually had someone get into the Zoom and posted pro-Nazi things and anti-LGBTQ things. And so what we've been struggling with is creating, how do we meet this challenge with the isolation they're facing? And honestly, over these past 6 weeks, we've seen an uptick in kind of this anti-LGBTQ harassment we've experienced as an organization, our staff, and on all of our virtual platforms. And from TikTok, which I thought was a fun thing for all the kids to use, to everything else. And it's been really tough to kind of try to meet that challenge, because we know that isolation and the lack of that education, the lack of supportive educators, the lack of that one supportive adult in the kid's life is dangerous, to say the least. And now on top of that, you have this white nationalist troll kind of thing that's happening online. And so it's not so simple as let's plug in a Zoom and have a conversation anymore. It's how do we create a safe space virtually too, is a challenge we're facing. And so it's been wild, to say the least, to see all that uptick, and it's scary. And for our students with that isolation, again, they're at home and maybe their parents aren't supportive. Maybe their parents are trying to do conversion therapy to their own kids who are LGBTQ. That educator, that supportive adult in their life can be there and be that lifeline for them and be that escape for them. And they don't have that. And then when they try to access something virtually, they're running into this kind of white nationalist just angst and just evil that's out there. and how do we respond and create those safe spaces as organizations, as schools, I'm sure we'll be struggling with this too. And as just a community, how do we respond to that? And so it's been an ongoing challenge for us, but also our kids. Like I'm very worried, like I said earlier, about this and the suicide risk for LGBTQ kids who are impacted at any age with this pandemic.
Scary, scary things that you guys are surfacing. Now we're going to move into audience questions, and I will start with some of the questions that we received from people when they were registering. So I'll shoot these at you guys at a particular panelist, but then others feel free to chime in. So one of the questions that was asked was, how do I recognize in my children when there's increased stress or anxiety? If it's not completely obvious, what behaviors should I be looking out for so that I'm aware of that? Why don't I start with Dr. Khosravi and Dr. Hill, and then we can open it up a little bit as well.
Sure. This is an area where I'm quite familiar, obviously, seeing a lot of children with elements of anxiety and depression. So what's different about children versus adults, a lot of times the underlying anxiety and depression presents as, I think I briefly mentioned it, in a lot of excessive irritability, sometimes elements of aggression and disruptive behaviors. Those are really key areas that I look at, but there's also a psychosomatic component, which means kids who are suffering from anxiety a lot of times will have unexplained headaches or stomach aches. So they'll throw up a little bit more, have headaches out of the blue, and stuff that you haven't seen in the past. It can present, emotional pain can present in a physical way as well. So those are areas that I think are fairly common that I see with the physical component. And it's really important to note the disruptive, more aggressive type behaviors. But the other thing that I see commonly that's very important, one key marker I always look at when I'm screening for depression in children is elements of what I call anhedonia. So anhedonia is lack of pleasure. So they stop doing activities, they stop going outside, they stop doing some of the things they enjoy, hobbies, which is a little trickier to gauge now because everyone's in this quarantine, obviously, and more restricted in their activities. But it's definitely a difference that you can notice because you know your child well.
Interesting. Dr. Hill, things to add?
I completely agree with everything Dr. Khosravi said. I would say too, one of the things that I've been hearing from more teenagers is not wanting to get out of bed, just having no motivation. Even though, a lot of the schools have optional at this point, but even the ones that are required, like just not feeling like, why do I even bother? Kind of feeling that hopelessness. And so I definitely think if, the irritability is an important factor for anxiety and depression for kids and teenagers, but if they're, getting at a level where they just don't want to come out of their room at all, they're just not engaging at all, they're not even trying to connect with their friends anymore, those are definitely significant concerns that you want to seek help at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mary Jane, I'll direct this question at you. We had a question about how do we know or how can we ensure that schools are really going to be paying attention to mental health when we return? What are the resources there?
Well, I can tell you they're not, the resources are not as robust as I'd like to see them. And I think most educators would agree with that. The number of students to school counselors in our schools is too high. But I do know that the guidance and the pieces that school districts are being asked to consider in their return to learn plan do have a mental health focus to them. I know that we're talking about students today, and we're talking about the students missing the interactions of school and the connections. I can tell you, teachers are missing that interaction with their students more than you could possibly imagine. And they are focused right now while they're at home with a particular student's face in their mind, somebody that was struggling when they left school and that they're worried about and trying to connect with. So those teachers are going to be talking to each other and going to be really focusing on that when we get back. What we've got to do as a society is to understand that mental health and the needs of our students is a tremendous issue that is as important as anything else that we're working on in our schools with them, and that we have to fund that. I'm hopeful that some of the resources that the federal government is providing to schools can be used to make that a more robust program. And Renee has done a beautiful job of talking about the inequities that exist in our system. Those inequities have been exacerbated by this situation and will continue to be that way into the fall. And we need to figure out how to remediate as much of that as we can as we move back into the fall as well. So it is a top of the mind issue for educators in what they're going to do to support their students. But I do hope as we look at public policy pieces in the recovery from this pandemic, we focus on our students' mental health as a part of that.
Thank you. So we have a question or more of a comment dealing with resilience. And so Nate, I'll start with you and then pop it to Renee. But for the youth you're working with, just sort of in mentoring and one-on-one, how can you teach them or support them in being resilient? What has been working for you?
So we follow a model that we kind of create on our own, just on the fly, about where we're trying to build our students to be. We call it chic, because don't we all want to be chic? And so confident, healthy, innovative, qualified, engaged. But the confidence piece is what's really key. And so what we work to do is we want our students to see that they have power in their voice. That's one of the key things, is a lot of times when LGBTQ students are victimized already, that power is taken away because of their identity. And so how do you use your power or your identity as power? And so whether that's talking to legislators or advocating for themselves, or talking, in their schools and advocating, doing presentations about their identities, we want to give them that power. And part of it, we're talking about a population that is being victimized based on who they are. We try to, throw a lot of rainbows around it, is what we also kind of talk about. And so we're trying to figure out ways too, like Pride won't happen this year. We will not have a Pride celebration. That's kind of physical. And so what that does for like a lot of students too, that could be their one time where they get to be a part of a larger community and see that they're a part of something bigger. And so how do you create that for them? And so we're finding ways to do that, from sending them to a book or a rainbow flag or whatever that might be. But then also, okay, let's take that next step and build up your confidence in who you are. You should be very proud of who you are. And when you walk into a room, you're amazing. And that's the idea we give them. And so building that in any way and exhibiting that is so important as adults. It's going to be, obviously a challenge virtually doing that. We've even resulted to doing drag queen story time on our Facebook. Everyone should watch it. It's a great series that we have every Tuesday. And they've read a series of books, and we have 2 drag queens that teach students everything they need to know about life through children's books. But even little things like that to kind of show them they can be who they are.
That's excellent. I will have to check that out.
Yeah.
Renee, with your bigs and littles.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna, and thank you, Nate, for, I have to tune into as well. I need to go back to my childhood. I was always told that it takes a village to help raise a child, a village. And we are all a part of that village. And I want parents to feel that they are not alone, and that there are so many other resources out there to help fill that gap and build that child's self-esteem and help them with educational things and help them when they're troubling. And that's what Big Brothers Big Sisters does through the mentoring relationships. We have over 500 or so matches right now. And we have, folks that are providing compassion and positivity and hope with these children. So you build resiliency by hopefully having a child be around a lot of positive influences. And so don't feel that you're alone. Get out there and take advantage of all kinds of resources, not just Big Brothers Big Sisters, but there's all kind of resources out there that can help fill this gap and help fill this, be a part of that village. And the village is not only your parents, the grandparents and faith leaders and mentors and neighbors. And so I just look at what we need to do is ask ourselves, are we part of someone's village? Are we part of a child's village to provide them with times of distraction when they might need it? A call to say, you're just awesome, and we're gonna get through this together, and you're gonna be safe, and we are gonna get on the other side together. And all I have is a little that just wants to go swimming and go to Chuck E. Cheese. And so we'll call and we'll just talk. And it's a distraction from her fear that her mom might get sick, who has asthma, if she goes outside. And so resiliency is built around encouragement and positivity and compassion, and really just being present and allowing that child to express what's on their mind. That builds resiliency and strength and fortitude in a kid.
That's wonderful. On one of our rehearsal calls, an interesting comment came up that we've seen at our company. Somebody mentioned to me one day, a community leader, that he was experiencing stress and anxiety and self-doubt that had never happened to him before. And that suddenly he had developed this empathy that people who have mental health issues, oh, this is a real thing. Dr. Khosravi, you talked about maybe there actually being an opportunity here to reduce stigma around mental health when people are having that light bulb go off. Can you talk a little bit about how we could seize this moment?
Yeah, I definitely can comment on that. Obviously the focus a lot on the pandemic is negative, and throughout the past 2 to 3 weeks, I've probably been looking at this a little bit differently, trying to reframe the pandemic as best as I can. And I think all of us need to do that at some level. And I really believe that one of the things that will come out of this is that people who have never experienced anxiety or mood symptoms at a more persistent level, all of us obviously at some level have had situational anxiety and mood that fluctuates a little bit, but not all of us have experienced this feeling of anxiety and the unknown for this amount of time. So what I'm really hoping happens is these people who are experiencing this new onset anxiety or mood, really, I think that will help us empathize and relate to the hundreds and millions of children that are suffering from mental illness, and adults even. I think 1 in 5 children in Iowa suffers from a mental health issues. So I think it really is the opportunity for us to destigmatize mental health. And I think we're going to have more people understanding of what a child is going through just based on their own experiences. I'm hoping it's brief, obviously, and we give them tools to come out of this, but it certainly is an opportunity to destigmatize our feelings and foster acceptance and really allow these children to get the help they need, because we still see a lot of that where they don't reach out for help, or there's barriers put up. And I think this will allow us to really foster a different culture and acceptance.
Any of the rest of you want to talk a little bit about stigma? Okay, then I'll ask another question, kind of changing topics a little bit. Dr. Hill, you suggested earlier in one of our conversations that while many kids were really struggling with isolation and some of the effects of being at home, that other children actually were finding it positive, kids who are on the autism spectrum. Can you talk a little bit about those children or those who might be benefiting?
Sure. So yeah, I work with a lot of kiddos on the autism spectrum, and I would say other children too that have social anxiety or other types of anxiety, or just are extremely introverted in their personality, are actually finding a lot of relief right now. So they're in their safe spot. They have developed a new schedule for themselves. They don't have the social demands that create so much anxiety and stress for them. And so they're kind of in a groove right now. They don't mind this telehealth. Like it's okay with them if they can just do everything, as minimal interaction as possible. So, I mean, it's just a different spin on it. And I know, I've been working with a lot of those parents of those children and ways to help prepare them though, because at some point their schedule is going to change again, right? They're going to need to go back to the school building again, and they're going to have to face some of those social demands again. So, but right now, just finding some comfort in they're doing what they can. They believe that they're safe, and they're, they just are at one of the lowest places of stress that they've been in quite some time.
Different for every child, obviously. So the last question I'll ask all of you are, what resources are available? If you had a parent come to you, each one of you, where would you steer a parent? I mean, that's a pretty general question, but maybe again, from your own vantage point of why they might be asking you. So Mary Jane, let's talk about from an educational standpoint, if a parent needs help or is seeing a kid really suffer from an educational level or stress related to that, where should they go?
Well, I would say the first call would be to the teacher, the student's teacher, and have a conversation there. We also have school counselors. Someone mentioned in the question and answer the availability of school nurses, the fact that we need a lot more school nurses, but we do have those people. So I would say reach out to the school personnel and see what kind of support you can get there. I would also say our president is a 30-year veteran teacher and has been curating lots of good information from educators across the country. And they're all on our website, isea.org, in Mr. B's classroom. Come and take a look and see if there's something there that will help you. Things about mindfulness, things about stress relief, and just sort of ratcheting down the anxiety and trying to get through this. So reach out to the schools first. And I think, Renee, your comment about it takes a village, there's a lot of different places in our community that people can go.
Absolutely.
Renee, what about you? What resources would you like to offer?
Yeah. I'd like to certainly put a plug in for if families are looking for an extension of that village and looking for a positive, compassionate adult to help mentor their child, I'd ask that they consider Big Brothers Big Sisters. We have such phenomenal volunteers that are reaching out to our kids and helping them with homework and helping them with issues and defending their potential. So if you're looking for an extra person to be a part of that village of helping your child thrive, we'd ask that you give us a call at Big Brothers Big Sisters. Our doors are closed, but our hearts are open. And we are still having volunteer enrollments and still trying to connect adults with kids. And it is more important today than ever.
Terrific. Nate, what about you?
Well, obviously, I mean, every Tuesday morning, tune in for Drag Queen Story Time. It's a magical experience for everyone. But besides that, you know, in all seriousness, if anyone comes to our website, iowasafeschools.org, or emails us or gives us a call, we'll send parents, literally it's a care package. It's a physical box, and we'll put in LGBTQ inclusive resources, books, literature based on their age range, as well as, like I said, you have the traditional rainbow flag in those services, but then we also put in information on hotlines, suicide hotlines, texting lines, crisis chats, things like that. And then the last thing is we're still trying to provide those virtual resources for kids, even though we're dealing with some challenges, you know, in how do you navigate that in a more aggressive kind of white nationalist world. But we're still doing that. And even today we have a virtual GSA meeting happening. So if you go hop on our social media accounts, you can sign up and you have that resource for those students there. That's kind of the critical thing with this population, is just affirming who they are. And then, you know, as previously folks mentioned, there's so many resources in our community. And so it's networking with those now more than ever.
Dr. Hill, what resources would you suggest?
Well, I would just hope that parents and families keep in mind that if they are concerned about their child or their youth, that counseling is available even now with, you know, telehealth right now, and hopefully soon we'll be able to move to more in person. But I would say if you're not sure, you know, you're concerned about your child, but you're just not sure if counseling is needed, you could always call and do an intake, and that person can help you kind of determine if the level is serious enough where they need some help. I would also suggest, and there are lots of different websites, but the American Psychological Association has a website at apa.org. and they have a whole lot of articles and different focus points to help parents care for their children, specifically during the pandemic time.
Dr. Khosravi?
The state has actually set up a line, 211 extension 8 will actually get you to the mental health portion if you're wanting to access resources. And I should say every hospital, Broadlands, Unity Point, Mercy One certainly, and all across the state, we also still do acute, assessments. If the level rises to a point you feel like your child's really decompensating and there's an active danger component, we still have, hospitalization or intensive outpatient programs. Please Pass the Love is a local organization. I think they work with schools as well as a lot of youth who they're doing a lot of Zoom meetings where they're encouraging social connectedness with people or kids who are really struggling with social isolation. And on a national level, I really enjoy Child Mind Institute. They're on Instagram and Facebook. They have a lot of great tips for parenting and videos, and I've really enjoyed their series. And the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry also has something similar to what was mentioned as far as the COVID-19 resource page for parents.
Terrific. That is going to wrap up the panel, but I do want to share the things that we have coming up. This was the first in 6 panels, and so next week we will look at College Interrupted. We have an amazing panel for all of these. Then we'll look at parenting, which is very, very related to what we've talked about today. Next, we will focus on small businesses, then workplace, and finally, what we've talked about a little bit already today is equity and inclusion interrupted. You can register at dsmmagazine.com/liftingtheveil-2020. And we'll of course send all of you a follow-up with that information. Of course, I want to encourage all of you to sign up for DSM's free newsletters, DSM Weekly, DSM Weekend, and DSM Wealth, and our new IA newsletter, which is a statewide publication that comes twice a month. And of course, we'd love for you to subscribe to our stunning print publications, DSM and IA. We cover all sorts of topics, including social issues like the one that we are talking about now. And finally, please mark your calendar. Our regular Lifting the Veil event will be on November 19th, and we'll unveil a publication having to do with mental health, as well as having another panel at that time. So that will hopefully be in person, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. So thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists. You were fantastic. And I want to thank our sponsors again, in particular, our presenting sponsor, Delta Dental of Iowa. You really made this possible. Our supporting sponsors, United Way of Central Iowa and Clive Behavioral Health, which is a partnership with Mercy One. Our sustaining sponsors, Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, Employee and Family Resources, Make It Okay, UCS Healthcare, and Des Moines University. Without your support, we could not have done this, so we very much appreciate it. So thanks to all of you who joined us. This audience exceeded our expectations, so we know we've hit on an important topic. Thank you for caring about mental health and for working every day to lift the veil. More hugs, less stress. Thank you. Happy Friday. And this concludes our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.